The room was filled with a mix of excitement and tension. It was a formal gathering, one of those high-profile corporate events where every detail mattered. The lighting was soft, yet bright enough to highlight the polished floors and the neat arrangement of chairs. People were dressed in their finest suits and dresses, their expressions a careful balance between curiosity and polite interest. The air smelled faintly of coffee and perfume, and the subtle background hum of low conversations made the atmosphere feel alive but restrained. Everyone present knew that these events were more than just social gatherings. There were opportunities to be seen, noticed, and remembered. Yet despite the formality, there was a quiet expectation that something unusual might happen. Something that would make this event stand out. At the center of the room, a grand piano sat under a spotlight. It looked elegant, almost out of place among the rows of sleek tables and chairs. The piano was polished to a mirror-like shine, reflecting the light in gentle glimmers. Most people hadn't paid it much attention until now. It was clearly not just a decoration. A soft murmur passed through the crowd as a staff member approached the piano, gesturing toward it. The murmurs grew louder, filled with curiosity and amusement. Everyone assumed this was going to be a light-hearted moment. Maybe someone would play a few simple notes for laughs. That was the expectation, at least. Among the crowd, the CEO stood slightly apart, watching with a quiet intensity. He was known for his sharp insight and his ability to read situations quickly. While others were settling into their assumptions, he noticed small details that everyone else missed. The way the piano was positioned, the careful adjustment of the bench, the subtle glances exchanged between the staff member and the person approaching the piano all suggested that something more meaningful was about to happen. Most people saw a setup for humor. The CEO's instincts told him that laughter might not be the main response this time, as the person walked toward the piano. There was a noticeable change in the room's energy. The whispers stopped, replaced by a silence filled with anticipation. People shifted in their seats, craning their necks to get a better view. Some tried to mask their interest with polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed their curiosity. They expected a joke, a silly performance, maybe a clumsy attempt at music that would make everyone laugh politely. No one was prepared for the seriousness that would soon unfold. The performer was a young woman who had been working quietly behind the scenes for years. She was not part of the public-facing team, and most people had never seen her before. She moved with a gentle confidence, her steps measured, almost hesitant. But there was a determination in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what she was about to do. She carried no fanfare, no announcement, no introduction. The simplicity of her approach contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the event and the expectations of the audience. She was just a person quietly approaching a piano, ready to share something personal. As she sat down at the piano bench, few people exchanged amused glances, whispering quietly to one another. "This should be interesting," one said with a small chuckle. "I wonder if she can even play," another added, smiling with a hint of mockery. The atmosphere was light and teasing, but there was an underlying tension that only a few could sense. The CEO remained still, his gaze fixed on her hands as they hovered over the keys. There was a subtle grace in her posture, quiet strength that suggested this was not going to be ordinary. Her fingers lingered over the keys for a moment, almost as if she was feeling the space around her, the anticipation in the air, and the expectations of the audience. Then she pressed the first key. The note was clear, resonant, and filled the room with a sound that demanded attention. It was simple, yet precise, as if the piano itself had been waiting for this moment. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, trying to understand what they were hearing. It was not a joke, nor was it clumsy. It was deliberate, meaningful, and unexpected. The initial sound set the tone for what was about to follow. The performer's hands moved gracefully across the keys, producing a melody that was soft yet confident. It was not flashy or showy, but it had a quiet power that slowly captured the attention of everyone present. Laughter, which had been anticipated, did not come. Instead, a hush settled over the room. Conversations faded, whispers stopped, and all eyes were on the young woman at the piano. The CEO's instincts were confirmed. This was more than a light-hearted performance. This was a moment of truth, a glimpse into talent, dedication, and perhaps a story that had remained hidden from most people's view as the music continued. Small details began to emerge that hinted at the performer's journey. The way she adjusted her fingers for difficult passages suggested years of disciplined practice. The subtle changes in tempo, the gentle dynamics, the emotional weight carried in each note, these were signs of someone who had poured herself into her craft despite the lack of recognition. The audience could feel it, even if they did not fully understand the depth of it yet. There was a human story embedded in the music, a story of struggle, persistence, and the quiet resilience that often goes unnoticed. Some attendees tried to maintain their initial amusement, exchanging quick glances to see if others were still laughing. But the expressions on their faces changed quickly. Curiosity replaced amusement, followed by surprise, and then a tentative respect. The music had a way of reaching them, touching emotions that they had not expected to feel in a corporate setting. Even those who were skeptical could not ignore the talent and intention behind each note. The performance was slowly transforming their perception, reminding them that there was more to people than appearances and assumptions. The young woman at the piano seemed unaware of the shift around her. She was fully immersed in the music, her focus entirely on the melody and the story she wanted to convey. Each movement of her hands was deliberate, each chord carefully placed. There was an authenticity in her playing that could not be fabricated. The audience sensed it immediately. This was not a performance meant to impress or entertain superficially. This was a sharing of something deeply personal, something that required courage to reveal in front of so many strangers. As the minutes passed, the room became almost sacred in its silence. People held their breath, not wanting to interrupt the fragile spell that had been cast. Even the staff who had arranged the event quietly stepped back, giving her space, recognizing that this moment had grown beyond the expectations of anyone present. The CEO watched closely, noting the way the audience responded. The subtle changes in posture, the widening eyes, the small smiles of awe and admiration. This was a lesson in human perception, a reminder that people are often underestimated and that talent can be hidden in the most unexpected places. The performer played with a mixture of technical skill and raw emotion. The melody was gentle, yet powerful. It told a story without words, a story that resonated with anyone who had ever been doubted or overlooked. There was a universality in her music, a connection that bridged differences in background, status, and expectation. It was a reminder that true expression does not need to be loud or flashy. It simply needs to be honest. And in that honesty, it becomes unforgettable. Even those who had come expecting a brief laugh found themselves captivated. They realized that their assumptions had been completely wrong. The young woman had turned a moment meant for amusement into a demonstration of skill, courage, and authenticity. The room was no longer just an audience. It had become a witness to something rare and profound. The music commanded attention, respect, and reflection. It challenged the idea that appearances could determine value and reminded everyone that true talent often emerges quietly, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. As the first part of her performance continued, a sense of anticipation began to build. The audience was no longer waiting for a joke. They were waiting to see where the music would take them. Each note, each pause, each gentle crescendo added to the tension and the beauty of the moment. The performer seemed to exist in a world of her own making, yet she was fully aware of the audience and the impact she was having. It was a delicate balance, and she handled it with grace and humility. By the time the first piece reached its subtle conclusion, the room was transformed. The laughter that had been expected never came. Instead, there was a silence filled with admiration, respect, and reflection. People exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unexpected depth of the performance. The CEO, who had observed closely from the beginning, knew that this was only the start. The young woman had not only played music, she had captured hearts and challenged perceptions. The first part of the evening had already become unforgettable, leaving an impression that would linger long after the final note had faded. The soft echo of the first piece lingered in the room, leaving a strange mixture of calm and anticipation. People were still processing what they had just witnessed. Some fidgeted slightly, glancing at each other, unsure if they should applaud yet. Others simply sat still, caught in a moment that felt bigger than themselves. The young woman at the piano did not move. She let the final note fade completely before even looking up, as if she were waiting for the room itself to settle and prepare for what was next. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, only a careful attention to the music and to the space she was sharing with the audience. The CEO remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. He could see the subtle muscle tension in the woman's hands, the slight shift in her posture, and the way she measured her breathing. These were not casual gestures. This was someone fully aware of her skill and of the vulnerability required to share it with so many eyes and expectations. He could also sense the audience's curiosity starting to turn into something else. Recognition that this was not a simple performance, and that what they had just heard was only a hint of her abilities. Slowly, she began again. This time, the notes came more deliberately richer, and with a confidence that contrasted the gentle vulnerability of the first piece. It was as if she were inviting the audience into her world, one note at a time. The room seemed to lean in with her, every person subconsciously drawn into the melody. There were no distractions. The small noises that had filled the space moments ago were gone. Chairs creaked softly as people adjusted themselves to listen more intently, and even the servers moving quietly along the edges of the room paused to catch a few bars of the unfolding music as she played. Her hands moved fluidly across the keys, yet each movement seemed to carry meaning beyond the technical skill. The melody began with subtle softness, gradually rising into crescendos that felt emotional and human. The audience could sense her story through the music, a story that no one could see, but everyone could feel. There was a depth in the performance that demanded attention, a truth that spoke louder than words ever could. Each chord carried the weight of practice, of patience, of countless hours spent perfecting her craft, and of the quiet resilience it took to arrive at this moment. People started to exchange glances again, but this time there were no smirks or whispers. Their expressions had changed, eyes widening in recognition, some lips parting slightly in surprise or awe. What was expected to be a light-hearted interlude had transformed into an emotional experience that none had anticipated. Even those who were initially skeptical could not deny the authenticity and strength in the young woman's playing. There was a subtle intensity in her focus, clear sign that this music came not only from training, but from the heart. The CEO, meanwhile, watched with a mixture of pride and reflection. He was not only observing the skill of the performer, but he was also witnessing the effect it had on those around her. It was rare to see someone command attention in such a quiet, understated way, and even rarer to see an audience so completely captivated without words or theatrics. He made a mental note of the subtle dynamics at play, how the music reshaped expectations, how perception could shift in an instant, and how resilience and quiet talent often went unnoticed until they were revealed in a moment like this. The room itself seemed to breathe with the music. It was as if the air had thickened, every sound sharpened, and every eye focused on the piano. Some audience members instinctively straightened their posture, drawn into the emotional flow of the melody. Others subconsciously mirrored the performer's movements, tapping fingers lightly on the table or shifting in rhythm with the music, unknowingly acknowledging the rhythm and intent behind every note. There was a shared understanding forming, an unspoken connection between the performer and the room, one that transcended the corporate formality that had dominated the evening until now. She began to vary the melody, leaving subtle shifts in tempo and tone. Her left hand provided a steady, comforting anchor, while her right hand danced lightly, creating small peaks of excitement and tension. The music started to tell a story, though without words, and yet it was unmistakably human. Listeners felt hints of struggle, moments of triumph, and quiet contemplation. Those who had arrived expecting humor or casual entertainment found themselves feeling deeply, their emotions caught unawares by the honesty of what they were hearing. The young woman was revealing not just her talent, but herself, in a way that was both intimate and public. Some of the audience members felt memories stirring within them, long-forgotten emotions resurfacing as the music touched something personal. a senior executive who had spent the last decade focused solely on numbers and presentations, found himself unexpectedly holding his breath. Recalling moments of his own life that resonated with the subtle intensity of the performance, a young intern, nervous and shy, was silently moved, her eyes glistening as she felt inspired by the dedication and quiet courage on display. The music spoke across generations, across experiences, and across expectations. It became clear to everyone that this performance was not about recognition or applause. There was no need for bravado or showmanship. The authenticity and sincerity of the young woman's playing transcended the usual hierarchy and the formalities of the event. The audience was no longer merely observers. They were participants in the unfolding story, each experiencing the music through their own lens, each moved in their own way. Laughter, once anticipated, seemed impossible now, replaced by a shared reverence for what was happening in front of them. The performer's focus was absolute. She appeared to exist entirely in the moment, yet every movement, every chord, every pause was intentional. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the audience, not seeking approval, but acknowledging their presence and the shared experience of the music. It was as if she were inviting each person to feel the story she was telling, to step into the world she had built with sound. The CEO noticed these subtle glances, appreciating the deliberate way she connected with the room, not with words, but through presence and intention. As the piece reached its midpoint, the dynamics shifted subtly. The music grew more complex, layered with emotion and technique that suggested years of dedication and practice. The audience was fully engaged, the room filled with a quiet intensity that made it impossible to think of anything else. People were aware of each other, yet each was absorbed individually, lost in their own experience of the music. The young woman had created a space where everyone could reflect, feel, and connect without interruption. The melody moved from moments of gentle contemplation to sections of quiet drama. Illustrating an unspoken journey, the hands of the performer glided over the keys with precision, yet the feeling behind each note was raw and palpable. There was a story hidden in the music, a story of perseverance, of being underestimated, and of embracing one's own abilities, despite the doubts of others. The audience could sense it, even if they could not articulate it. The music was human, deeply human, and that was what made it so compelling. Some members of the crowd began to shift in their seats, leaning forward as if to catch every subtle nuance of the performance. A few wiped small tears from their eyes, not out of sadness, but out of the unexpected emotional connection they felt. The CEO observed quietly, noting how the young woman's skill was altering the energy in the room, transforming a formal corporate event into a space for shared humanity. This was not something that could be planned or rehearsed for an audience. It required authenticity, courage, and vulnerability. By the time the second piece reached its gentle conclusion, the room had been transformed. Expectations of amusement and laughter had been completely replaced by a sense of awe and quiet reflection. People were no longer spectators in a formal event. They were witnesses to a rare and unspoken human moment. Even those who had initially doubted or dismissed the young woman's ability were now captivated. Their respect and admiration, evident in the attentive silence and thoughtful expressions, the performer allowed the final note to linger, letting it fade naturally into the stillness of the room. She did not rush, nor did she glance at anyone for validation. She simply let the music breathe, and in that space, the audience experienced a profound sense of connection and understanding. It was clear that the young woman had not only played music, she had shared a part of herself, and in doing so, she had altered the way everyone present perceived her, and perhaps even themselves. As the echoes of the music slowly disappeared, the room remained in a quiet state of contemplation. People were processing, reflecting, and perhaps reconsidering their assumptions about talent, expectation, and the power of authenticity. The CEO, standing quietly among them, recognized that this was more than a performance. It was a reminder of the unexpected ways in which human potential can reveal itself, and the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances. The first part of the evening had ended with a gentle clarity. Laughter had not been the answer. and the true story was only beginning to unfold. The music continued to flow, carrying the audience deeper into the world the young woman had created. Each note seemed to tell a story, and the people in the room began to sense that there was more behind the performance than just skill. The melody had layers, each one building upon the last, weaving together a narrative that could not be seen but could be felt. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys. But it was not the speed or complexity that captured attention. It was the emotion behind every movement. The story, embedded in each note, she began to play a piece that had more complexity than the previous ones, both technically and emotionally. It was a melody that shifted between moments of serenity and sudden tension, a reflection of human experience in its purest form. The audience was captivated, their attention fixed, their hearts responding to the rise and fall of the music. Even those who had been focused on networking or distracted by their phones were now entirely present. Caught in the subtle power of the performance, the CEO observed closely, noting not just the music, but the effect it had on each person in the room. Faces that had been expectant or amused were now thoughtful and moved. Some people had closed their eyes, allowing themselves to feel the music fully. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every nuance. There was a sense of shared experience, a silent recognition that something important was unfolding. The young woman at the piano had created a connection, one that transcended words, titles, and status. As the piece progressed, it became clear that the music was telling a story of struggle and perseverance. The melody carried a weight, a sense of challenges faced and obstacles overcome. Her hands moved with both strength and delicacy, reflecting resilience and tenderness at the same time. It was a story that resonated with anyone who had faced doubt or been underestimated. The audience could feel the layers of her life, the effort, the sacrifices, and the moments of quiet triumph that had brought her to this point. Some audience members felt memories stirring within them. A few executives thought of their own journeys, the long hours, the setbacks, the moments when they had been overlooked or underestimated. They were reminded of their own perseverance and dedication. A young intern recalled moments of self-doubt and the courage it took to continue despite challenges. The music became more than just sound. It became a mirror reflecting the struggles and victories of everyone. Listening, the young woman's performance was now fully commanding the room. She had moved beyond simple melodies into a composition that demanded attention and introspection. The audience felt the ebb and flow of emotion, the subtle shifts in tone that carried meaning far beyond the notes themselves. There was a rhythm to the story she was telling, one that spoke of patience, determination, and quiet strength. Each chord seemed deliberate, as though she were carefully placing each emotion in front of the listeners to be understood. The CEO, still watching intently, recognized a deeper message in the performance. This was more than a display of talent. It was a demonstration of character, the discipline, focus, and courage required to share such an intimate part of oneself in front of a room full of strangers was remarkable. He noted how quickly assumptions could be challenged and how easily a person's true value could be overlooked. The young woman had not only played music, she had revealed herself, and in doing so, she had changed the perception of everyone present. The room was silent, except for the music. And in that silence, the audience found themselves reflecting on their own lives. The melody shifted, introducing unexpected chords that created tension, then resolving them in a way that felt satisfying and truthful. It was a journey, a narrative without words, yet every person listening understood it on some level. The young woman's hands moved with confidence and precision, yet the feeling behind each note remained raw and human. There was a vulnerability in her playing that made it impossible to look away or remain detached. As she continued, the piece began to build to a gentle climax. The music became more layered, more complex, and yet more accessible emotionally. The audience felt the rising energy, the sense of anticipation, and the subtle exhilaration of being part of something rare and profound. There were no distractions, no interruptions. The room had become a vessel for the shared human experience that the young woman was creating. Every person present was aware of the moment, aware of the story being told, and aware of the quiet power of authenticity the young woman occasionally glanced at the audience, her eyes meeting theirs briefly before returning to the piano. There was no arrogance in her gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement that they were part of the experience. She was not performing for approval or recognition. She was sharing a piece of herself, trusting that those listening would receive it with the openness it deserved. The CEO noticed this, appreciating the humility and strength it took to perform with such honesty and vulnerability. The music continued to explore the emotional spectrum, moving from gentle, reflective passages to sections of dynamic intensity. The audience felt a sense of journey, as if they were being led through peaks and valleys, moments of tension and release, challenge and triumph. The young woman's hands moved with a fluidity that made each transition seamless, yet every note carried intention. There was a story behind each movement, a narrative of perseverance, courage, and self-discovery that was communicated without a single word. People in the room began to recognize the effort and dedication required to achieve such mastery. There was a sense of awe, a recognition of the hours, years, and possibly decades of practice, discipline, and sacrifice that had led to this moment. The music was not just entertainment. It was a testament to the human spirit, a reminder of the power of persistence and the beauty of talent nurtured through dedication. Even those who had doubted or underestimated her could no longer ignore the depth and authenticity of the performance. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, the young woman allowed the melody to soften, returning to the gentle, contemplative tone that had opened the performance. The audience felt a sense of calm and resolution, quiet satisfaction that came from experiencing something genuine and profound. The music had taken them on a journey, one that resonated personally, emotionally, and deeply. The room remained still, allowing the final notes to fade naturally, giving space for reflection and appreciation. When the last note finally lingered into silence, the audience remained quiet for a moment longer. Caught in the lingering emotion of the performance, there were no immediate claps, no rushed expressions of approval. Instead, there was a collective understanding, a shared recognition that they had witnessed something rare and meaningful. The young woman at the piano slowly lifted her hands and allowed herself a brief, satisfied breath. She had shared her story, her skill, and her heart, and the room had received it fully. The CEO was the first to break the silence, standing and offering a slow, deliberate clap. Others quickly followed, some rising to their feet, their applause filled with genuine admiration and respect. The laughter that had been expected at the beginning of the evening had been replaced by something far more powerful: recognition, understanding, and awe. The young woman smiled faintly, acknowledging the audience without seeking further validation. She had played not for approval, but for truth. And that truth had resonated with everyone present by the end of the performance. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. The corporate event had shifted from a formal gathering to a shared human experience. Conversations resumed slowly, but they were now infused with reflection and appreciation. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing their impressions and the emotions they had felt. The young woman had not only captivated the audience with her music, but it also reminded them of the profound impact of authenticity, its talent, and courage. As the audience settled back into the rhythm of the event, there was a lingering sense of connection and inspiration. The CEO remained in thought, considering the larger implications of what had just occurred. The young woman had demonstrated more than technical skill. She had revealed character, resilience, and the power of sharing one's true self. The audience, too, had been reminded that assumptions can be misleading, and that the most extraordinary stories often lie beneath quiet surfaces. The evening had begun with expectations of laughter, but what unfolded was a moment of profound reflection and human connection, one that would not be forgotten. The room held its breath as the young woman prepared for the next section of her performance. The energy was palpable, a quiet intensity that filled every corner of the room. People who had come expecting a lighthearted, almost comic interlude now realized that they were witnessing something far greater. The soft hum of anticipation replaced the initial whispers of amusement. The piano, polished and shining under the lights, seemed to respond to her presence, It's almost alive in the way it carried each note with clarity and emotion. She began with a deliberate, slow introduction, each note measured and precise. The simplicity of the first few bars was deceptive, for each tone carried subtle emotional undertones that hinted at a story behind the music. Listeners leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the depth of feeling conveyed without a single word. It was a delicate balance between vulnerability and mastery, a combination that made every note resonate on a personal level with those present. The CEO, watching intently, noticed the subtle shifts in the audience's expressions. Initial curiosity had turned into admiration, and now it was evolving into awe. Faces softened, eyes widened slightly, and there was a collective sense that something meaningful was being revealed. It was rare in such formal settings for people to be so openly affected, and yet the music had achieved what no words could. The young woman at the piano had taken control not through volume or speed, but through authenticity and presence. As the melody progressed, the dynamics began to shift. Soft passages gave way to richer, more powerful chords. The music carried tension and release in equal measure, drawing listeners into a narrative they could feel but not yet name. It was as if she was telling the story of human experience itself: struggle, perseverance, doubt, courage, and hope. The room was silent, save for the piano, and every ear, every heart seemed attuned to the flow of emotion. Audience members who had been skeptical at first were now fully engaged. A few senior executives, known for their analytical minds, found themselves unexpectedly moved, eyes glistening as they absorbed the depth of the performance. A junior employee, previously anxious and quiet, was visibly inspired. Drawn into the vulnerability and strength the young woman displayed, each person reacted differently, yet all were connected by the same thread. The music had touched something deeply human within them. The young woman's hands moved with fluidity and confidence, yet there was an unmistakable tenderness to each gesture. She allowed brief pauses between phrases, giving the room time to absorb the emotion of each passage. The silence between notes became as important as the notes themselves, creating a space where listeners could reflect, feel, and connect. It was a lesson in patience and intention, in how meaning is often found in subtlety, rather than spectacle. The CEO observed the careful orchestration of both technical skill and emotional storytelling. He recognized that this performance was not simply about impressing an audience. It was about communicating truth, about sharing an inner world that was rarely visible. The discipline required to achieve such precision while maintaining emotional authenticity was extraordinary. This young woman, who had been underestimated and overlooked, was now commanding the attention and respect of everyone in the room through her talent and honesty. The piece began to build. With melodies intertwining and harmonies growing richer, the music's energy shifted, becoming more dynamic, yet maintaining a delicate balance. Each note seemed carefully chosen to convey a deeper meaning, a story hidden beneath the surface. The audience felt as though they were being led through a journey through challenges and triumphs, moments of quiet reflection and sudden clarity. The young woman at the piano had become a guide, showing them the path through emotion and expression. Some members of the audience felt memories resurfacing, emotions they had not encountered in years. They recalled moments of personal struggle, moments when they had been overlooked or underestimated, and moments of quiet resilience. The music was not just entertaining, it was transformative. It reminded them of their own strength, their own humanity, and the potential within themselves that often remained hidden until recognized. The young woman had created a mirror through which everyone could see a part of their own story. As the climax approached, the room's energy intensified. The melody grew louder and more intricate, weaving together threads of emotion that had been building throughout the performance. The audience felt a collective surge of anticipation, a sense of witnessing something extraordinary. The young woman played with mastery, yet every note was imbued with vulnerability. It was a delicate dance between control and openness, between precision and expression, that held the room in rapt attention. The piano's resonance filled every corner, each chord reverberating through the space and into the hearts of those listening. The young woman's focus was absolute. She was fully present, yet aware of the audience's silent engagement. Occasionally, her eyes would meet theirs briefly, a subtle acknowledgement that they were part of the experience, that their presence mattered. It was a connection that transcended words, one created purely through shared attention and emotional resonance. The crescendo reached its peak, the music swelling with intensity, carrying a mix of triumph, vulnerability, and beauty. The audience held their breath, captivated by the combination of skill and feeling. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the melody, every listener attuned to the rise and fall of emotion. There was no need for applause or external validation. The music itself was its own reward, and the impact it had on the room was immediate and profound. Then, as if guided by an invisible hand, the young woman began to draw the piece to a close. The intensity gradually softened, the chords becoming lighter, more reflective. The energy of the room shifted once again, from exhilaration to quiet contemplation. Listeners were left with a sense of completion, a feeling that they had been taken on a journey and gently returned to stillness. The final notes lingered, fading naturally into silence. Giving space for reflection and appreciation, the audience remained still for a moment, absorbing the final chords and the weight of what they had experienced. There was a profound sense of connection, a shared recognition that they had witnessed something rare and meaningful. The laughter that had been expected at the beginning of the evening was nowhere to be found. In its place was admiration, respect, and a deep sense of human empathy. People looked around at one another, silent acknowledgement in their eyes, as if to say, "This was extraordinary." The CEO stood first, breaking the silence with deliberate, measured applause. Others followed, some rising to their feet, clapping with genuine admiration. The young woman allowed herself a faint, content smile, acknowledging the audience without seeking further validation. She had not performed for recognition or praise. She had shared a part of herself, and in doing so, she had left an indelible impression on everyone present. Conversations resumed slowly, but they were now filled with reflection and appreciation. Attendees spoke in hushed tones, sharing the impact the performance had on them. They discussed the skill, the emotion, and the authenticity they had witnessed. The young woman had transformed a formal corporate event into a moment of shared human experience, one that transcended status, titles, and expectations. The room had been united by music, and in that union, everyone present had been reminded of the power of authenticity, talent, and courage as the evening continued. The significance of the performance became more apparent. The young woman had not only demonstrated remarkable skill, she had conveyed resilience, dedication, and humanity in a way that resonated with all who were present. The audience had been given more than a performance. They had been given a lesson in empathy, understanding, and the importance of looking beyond appearances to recognize true talent and character. By the end of the moment, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. The young woman's performance had left an enduring mark, reminding everyone that assumptions could be misleading and that the most extraordinary moments often emerge from the quietest places. The evening, which had begun with expectations of amusement and laughter, had transformed into an experience of profound reflection and connection. The final note had faded, but the impact lingered. A quiet reminder of the unexpected power of music and human authenticity. The final echoes of the music faded into the room, leaving a silence that felt thick with emotion and reflection. People sat quietly for a few moments, letting the experience sink in. There was no rush to speak, no need for immediate applause or commentary. The young woman at the piano gently straightened her posture, her hands resting on her lap, taking a moment to breathe and absorb the attention she had drawn, not through showiness, but through honesty and dedication. The audience, which had arrived expecting laughter and light amusement, now felt something far more profound. The shift was visible in their expressions, their posture, and the way they looked at one another. Conversations that had been idle or distracted moments ago were replaced by thoughtful glances and quiet murmurs of appreciation. The music had changed the atmosphere entirely, turning a formal corporate gathering into a space for genuine human connection. People began to understand that what they had witnessed was not merely a performance, but a display of character, talent, and courage. The CEO stepped forward, his presence commanding but gentle. He was the first to approach the young woman at the piano, not with formality, but with genuine curiosity and respect. His eyes conveyed recognition, not just of her technical skill, but of the emotional depth and authenticity she had displayed. As he spoke with her, it became clear that the impact of her performance extended beyond applause. It had revealed something about her resilience, dedication, and ability to convey profound emotion through her craft. The CEO's admiration was visible, not only to her, but to the few nearby observers who noticed the rare moment of genuine acknowledgement from someone in such a high position. Others in the room slowly gathered around, their expressions a mixture of awe, curiosity, and newfound respect. They asked questions, not about technicalities or formalities, but about her journey, how she learned, what inspired her, and what it took to perform with such honesty in front of so many people. She spoke softly, without pretense, sharing glimpses of her dedication. The hours spent practicing in quiet solitude, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. Her story resonated with everyone present because it was human, relatable, and real. The audience felt that they had been invited into her world, not as spectators of skill, but as witnesses to her courage and commitment. As the event continued, people who had been distant or disengaged earlier now approached her, expressing their admiration and sharing personal reflections. Some admitted that they had underestimated her at first, expecting a moment of light entertainment, only to find themselves moved beyond expectation. Others spoke of the emotions her music had stirred in them, how it had reminded them of challenges, resilience, and triumphs in their own lives. It became clear that the performance had created a ripple effect, touching hearts and sparking introspection that extended beyond the room. The young woman remained humble throughout, responding with gratitude and quiet composure. She did not seek recognition or praise. Her aim had been to share a part of herself and to connect through the language of music. Yet in doing so, she had transformed the perception of everyone in the room. People began to realize that talent and character often go unnoticed in everyday life, and that true expression requires courage, vulnerability, and authenticity. The CEO, reflecting on the performance, recognized the lessons that went beyond the music. Leadership, he thought, was not just about making decisions or managing teams. It was about seeing the potential in people, about recognizing value where others might not. The young woman's performance was a testament to that principle. She had quietly demonstrated her worth, not through self-promotion, but through the integrity of her craft. The CEO considered how often people are judged by appearances, and how rare it is to witness someone reveal their full potential so honestly and effectively.